We ended yesterday with the establishment of the cult of reason. Shortly thereafter, later that spring, France declared war on Austria. It was a preemptive move because France completely expected Austria to be attacking them, and they wanted to get the drop on them, as it were. France should have anticipated the immediate alliance between Austria and Prussia, which did follow, and both nations invade. France begins losing almost immediately. War with Prussia soon follows, and the Prussian commander, the Duke of Brunswick, pushes pretty deep into France. At one point, he says that he'll take any action necessary if it means preventing harm to the royal family. When he said any action necessary, he was including the possible destruction of the entire city of Paris in his threat. That freaked the people of Paris out pretty well. And on the 10th of August, a date that's simply known as 10 August, a group of agitated, irritated, frightened Parisians begin marching toward the Tuileries Palace that you see here on the left, demanding the king abdicate his throne. Louis and his family are notified that the mob is approaching. They flee from the Tuileries to a very near building where the Legislative Assembly was meeting. They seek asylum from the Legislative Assembly. The Legislative Assembly offers that asylum and then suspend Louis from office. He's not forced to abdicate. The monarchy is not abolished, but he is no longer capable of doing the veto powers and appointing ministers and stuff. And the Legislative Assembly, recognizing that it lacks the power to stop this mob, actually declares that a new constitutional convention should be convened. In the turmoil that ensues governmentally, the Legislative Assembly is still ruling, but the Constitutional Convention is being convened. What happens in the midst of that, between September 2nd and September 7th, so 5 days in early September, is called the September Massacres. There's still fear over the Prussian troops. They're getting closer and closer to Paris. So in Paris, these mobs are still roving, and they storm prisons, they attack prisoners, they mutilate their bodies. And the reasoning behind this is somewhat faulty, but it's this. The mobs fear that the prisoners are counter-revolutionaries who were pro-royalist, who, if the Prussians got to Paris, would aid the Prussians in restoring the monarchy. In total, during these 5 days, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,200 to 1,400 prisoners are massacred, condemned, executed in summary trials that are held in these prisons. It is a very ugly week in Paris. The National Convention comes into being on September 20th of 1792. It's going to take 3 years for the National Convention to write another new constitution for France. What you're seeing in this image here is a trial that was held. On the right-hand side, sitting, holding some papers up, is Louis XVI. He is being tried for crimes against his nation by the National Convention. There are 3 major leaders of this group. Maximilien Robespierre, who will be known for his leadership of the Terror. Jean-Paul Marat, who is a supporter and potential instigator of the September massacres, which occurred before the convention began. And Georges Danton, who may have incited the storming of the Tuileries on 10 August, which convinced the Legislative Assembly that a new constitution was needed. Now, there's some vocabulary you need while we're discussing the National Convention. Jacobins. Jacobins are the educated members of the Third Estate. Most of them are bourgeoisie. The Jacobins begin with very mainstream ideas. Over time, though, they become increasingly radical because more and more conservative members of the group will leave to form their own club. Originally, the Jacobins include individuals like Robespierre, Marat, Danton, and a future king of France by the name of Louis Philippe is actually a member of the Jacobins. Another group that existed within the National Convention are the Girondists. The Girondists support the war and the extreme measures against nobles and clergy, but don't support popular violence like the September massacres or 10 August. Because they refuse to be radicalized, the Jacobins will force them out of the Jacobin Club. Then we have the Mountain. In this picture, you can see that there are some seats that are very high up in this hall. The Mountain becomes the name of a group of Girondists who like to sit very high up in this hall, as though they are sitting up on a mountain. Sans-culottes. Sans-culottes literally means people without breeches. Breeches are the short pants that the men wear, the nobility, that fasten just below the knee. So sans-culottes are people who don't wear those. They don't want to be associated with the nobility. They're the working people who wear long pants. To be wearing long pants is to be seen as a supporter of the revolution. To be wearing short pants is to be seen as a royalist, an anti-revolutionary, a counter-revolutionary. All right. The National Convention convenes on September 20th, 1792. On September 21st, 1792, the French monarchy is abolished. They get rid of the office of king. Louis, in the trial we saw, is actually convicted. He is sent to the guillotine on the 21st of January, 1793. He is executed at a place, a square that had been previously named for Louis XV. Today in Paris, it is called Place de la Concorde. During this time and for some time afterward, though, it was called Place de la Révolution. And so it is often still referred to as the Place de Revolution or the Place de la Concorde. Almost immediately after Louis' execution, England and Spain enter the war against France, and the war is going very, very badly for France. Riots erupt in the countryside. The French military commander actually abandons his post in April of 1793 and flees to Austria. Food prices are rising. Things are getting out of control very rapidly in France. And so the National Convention decides that this group of 750 some guys, meeting on a fairly regular basis, just can't control things closely enough. And so they create a group known as the Committee of Public Safety. The Committee of Public Safety is created in April of 1793, the day after the French military commander abandoned his troops on the field of battle. And the Committee of Public Safety will be around for about 2.5 years. It's supposed to be a smaller, more efficient governing body. Its members are elected by the whole membership of the National Convention. It is originally conceived of and led by Danton. Robespierre is elected to the Committee of Public Safety in July of 1793. He becomes known as the Incorruptible, and eventually he's going to rule the Committee of Public Safety, the National Convention, and essentially the nation of France as a virtual dictator until he is executed by the guillotine, which he loved to use so well. He will hold power over a group called the Revolutionary Tribunal. It is a court of the National Convention, which sentences more people to death under Robespierre's tenure than during the entire rest of the revolution. Robespierre does not like opposition to his power, and as such he has Danton arrested and sent to the guillotine in April of 1794, just a year after the creation of the Committee of Public Safety. Robespierre will then begin what's known as the Terror, with a law set to enforce food prices and mandatory food collection in order to feed Paris. It's called the Law of Maximum. The other member of the Mountain, the Jacobins who had controlled the National Convention, Jean-Paul Marat, is assassinated in his bath in 1793 in July. He had been a veterinarian and a doctor. He was actually the doctor to the future King of France, Charles X. When the revolution began, he gave up medicine and science and became a journalist, actually publishing his own newspapers. He put himself at some risk in publishing those newspapers. He denounced Jacques Necker, and he denounced the Marquis de Lafayette, who was seen as a national hero. He was actually so unpopular after those denunciations that he had to flee to London for his own safety. Eventually, he'll return to France. He continues to publish controversial things and ends up actually spending some time hiding in the sewers of Paris to protect himself. Now, Marat had a very debilitating skin condition, severe itching. So much itching and so bad that no amount of willpower could keep you from scratching it. It was so uncomfortable that he actually retired from the National Convention and spends his time soaking in a medicinal bath, which is how he's been painted here by the famous French painter David. It is while he is soaking in this bath that a royalist sympathizer by the name of Charlotte Corday comes in. She has a knife concealed in her corset. She actually provides Marat with a list of supposed royalist sympathizers from her home city. You can see it there in the painting held in his hand. As he has just finished that list, she approaches him in the bath, pulls the knife from her corset, stabs him in the chest, severing his carotid artery. He dies within seconds. During her trial, she says, quote, "I killed one man to save 100,000 men." Because she believes that Marat's paper and his connections to the National Convention and the Committee of Public Safety have actually have actually spurred on the terror and driven increasing numbers of executions. The Reign of Terror will last from officially the 5th of September 1793 to July of 1794. This is the time when Robespierre is in virtual dictatorship of France. And this is a political cartoon where he is there holding the rope of the guillotine. The revolutionary calendar, created by Robespierre to de-Christianize France, goes into effect in September of 1793. There are weeks of 10 days. Every 10th day is a day of rest, a federal holiday. There are 3 10-day weeks in a month and 10 months in a year. And then the 5 leftover years are just there as holiday as well. The months are named for weather and for seasons, trying to get away again from the god-based names that had been carried forward from Roman times. Robespierre had never been a fan of the cult of reason. He believed that some sort of religion was necessary for his people, and so he establishes the cult of the Supreme Being in May of 1794. He intends for it to become the state religion of France. When he is executed, the cult of the Supreme Being will cease to be followed or celebrated in any way. Ultimately, it's going to be banned by Napoleon in 1804. The image you see is a national festival celebrating the cult of the Supreme Being. This is actually the large open park called the Champ de Mars. It is today immediately adjacent to the Eiffel Tower. Of course, in 1794, the Eiffel Tower had not yet been built. That mountain that you see there, that large hill, was entirely man-made, specifically for the festival that is being celebrated here. All of it created by Robespierre. Robespierre will be executed by the guillotine in 1794 in July. He had made too aggressive a move to eliminate some of his opposition, and they beat him to the punch, accused him. He went to the guillotine, and that marks the end of the Reign of Terror. In April of the following year, Austria will make peace with France. During this period of time that are called the Revolutionary Wars, where France is fighting with Prussia and Austria and Britain and Spain, a song is composed, and it is played in the armies afield defending France. In April of 1795, when Austria makes peace with France, that song is declared the national anthem of France, and it is called La Marseillaise. La Marseillaise is still the national anthem of France. If you watch the Winter Olympics this year and watch any of the medal ceremonies, you may hear it played in its entirety. You will also hear me make some reference to it when we are studying Napoleon. In September of 1795, the Constitution of 1795 is ratified by the people of France. Following that is an event called 13 Vendémiaire. It is the 5th of October, but remember, we're operating under that interesting revolutionary calendar. On the 5th of October, the National Convention was still ruling. The Constitution of 1795 had been ratified, and elections are being held for this new government. Another uprising in the countryside has spread to Paris, and riots are in the street of Paris. The National Convention says that they will stay in their meeting rooms until the riot has been subdued. Under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte, the French National Guard repels an assault on the National Convention, despite the fact that they were outnumbered 6-1. Napoleon loaded 40 cannon with what is called grape shot and ordered it fired into the crowd, earning a strategic victory and defeating morally the attackers. He becomes a national hero and is ultimately given command of the French army in Italy. The elections having taken place, the Directory is seated in November of 1795 and will be in place for 4 years. Its executive branch consisted of 5 directors, and they ruled as the executive branch along with 750 legislators. 2/3 of the legislators elected were required to be elected from the membership of the National Convention. It is here that we will stop because Napoleon gets very involved in the rest of this history. So to do it from the top, the Estates General, the National Assembly, the National Constituent Assembly, the Legislative Assembly, the National Convention, out of which was created the Committee of Public Safety, which oversaw the terror. That's a time period, not a government. The National Convention created the Constitution, which created the final government you're responsible for Monday's quiz, which is the Directory. You should use the remainder of the time that you have to consolidate your notes, to make sure you have information that I haven't discussed that's in the book integrated into your notes. You should study Europe for the map quiz tomorrow. You could review your words of the day. You could read ahead and work on Section 4's notes. What you cannot do is sleep or just chat idly. Have a good rest of the day.